Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I am an NHS doctor and a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahaminous. Now, the Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has just been sent to prison, but why? How will he be treated there by other prisoners? What's the difference between somebody being remanded and somebody being on bail? And what are the reasons that the court look for to remand somebody? I'm going to answer all those questions and so much more in this episode of A Psych for Sore Minds. First of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of background just so that you've got this whole case into context, and then we'll get on with the juicy stuff. So Mason Greenwood will spend more than a month in custody until his next court date because a district judge very recently denied him bail on charges of attempted, we'll call it grape because I don't want to say the word for YouTube algorithm reasons, but it rhymes with grape, and other offences. He was repeatedly engaging in coercive and controlling behaviour. He's been accused of monitoring the victim's social media accounts and making threats and derogatory comments towards her. And also, just to throw it in there, he made some threats to kill. Who is Mason Greenwood? You probably know if you're watching this. He was once considered one of the most talented English forwards of his generation, although he's not played or trained with his team, Man United, since his arrest, which was about 10 months ago. Electronic Arts removed him from the active squads on its FIFA 22 game. EA Sports, it's in the game. And Greenwood made his England debut in a UEFA Nations League game against Iceland in September 2020 when he was aged just 18. So I think it's reasonable to say that he was on path to be like a prodigy. Well, he was a prodigy on path to be a superstar. So he was originally on bail when he first got arrested in January, but then he breached his conditions, so now he's on remand. So what does that mean, on remand? I think it's an important, if not basic, thing to cover because it often gets confused or conflated with an actual prison sentence. So somebody's placed on remand if they're deemed to be dangerous or high risk. So it basically means that you've not had your trial yet, but you need to stay in prison. The court thinks that you're so dangerous, you need to stay in prison until your trial. So it's quite possible that somebody's on remand for a long period of time. If it's a murder charge, it could even be years, then found not guilty and then released. So that's very different from what a sentence is. So a sentence is when the court is saying you are guilty and this is your punishment, a prison sentence. What are the reasons that people might be placed under remand? So the main one would be if they're charged with a very serious crime, for example, armed robbery or murder. I suppose you could argue that Mason Greenwood's charges were particularly serious, but obviously that's not what that particular judge thought. But who are we to judge the judge? Sorry. Or another reason might be if you've been convicted of a serious crime in the past, and if the court thinks that you might not go to your court hearing, or perhaps even try and flee the country, try and escape, presumably to Benidorm. By the way, as a side question, a bonus for you Psych for Sore guys and gals, can you tell me what is the longest time that an individual prisoner has been on the run? Tell me the number of years and also the nationality of that prisoner. Answers later in this video. Another reason, another major reason is that the court might think that you will commit a crime if you're on bail. So if you're released before your trial, you might commit a crime. So from my experience of working as an expert witness in courts, that can often be in the context of domestic violence. So if a man, and it's usually a man, is repeatedly violent towards his partner, even with previous police intervention, there's no suggestion that they will stop that even if they're waiting for trial. So they're too dangerous to be let out of prison in case they carry on seeking the victim. Another one that I've seen commonly is gang murders. So if somebody's involved in lots of sort of gang beefs and gang fights and stabbing, etc., sometimes they don't care that they've been arrested, and even if they're on bail, they will go and sort out their beefs because they're really about that life. And finally, another situation that I see a lot as a forensic psychiatrist is if somebody has a severe mental illness and that mental illness is encouraging them or driving them to be violent. So for example, I saw a case a few 2-3 months ago about a man with schizophrenia who was hearing voices, and he was convinced that his neighbour was a child abuser, even though it was completely delusional. So he actually went around and stabbed his neighbour. And even though he understood superficially that he was on trial, he could go to prison in the long term, he didn't care. He was so compelled by these voices and these delusions that he almost certainly would have gone on to attack his neighbour despite bail conditions. He ended up going to hospital, but it took a few days to find a suitable hospital bed in a secure unit, and the judge, very reasonably, in my view, thought that he was so dangerous that for that time he needed to be remanded in prison as opposed to bailed out into the community. And the final reason that you get remand is if you've been given bail in the past, but you've not stuck to your particular conditions. So you've been a naughty boy. In terms of Mason Greenwood, we know he's breached his conditions, but what he actually did is not public knowledge. So, for example, his bail conditions, I'm sure, would have been that he must not contact the complainant, her friends, or her parents or her family. So I'm speculating here, but I'm just saying it's possible that it could be that he did that he contacted his victim even through social media. Or, for example, another common reason that people breach their bail conditions, or another common format, is if they go into an area where they're not supposed to go. So I've certainly seen people that have been put on bail, they're not allowed in the area where the victim lives, but they breach that bail. Or they're not allowed to associate with their peers, with gang members, but they breach that, then they get remanded. To be fair, in Mason Greenwood's case, and in any case, it could be something much less sinister. For example, you're supposed to meet with your parole officer at certain appointments, you don't turn up, you're not deemed to be playing the game, you're deemed to be a rebel against the system, bam, you are remanded. Okay, enough foreplay, let's get to the main question. How will Mason Greenwood be treated in prison? Before I answer that, I just want to introduce you to my channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. As I said, a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally ill defendants in courts and prisons and in psychiatric units. My channel is a smorgasbord of topics related to true crime with a little sprinkling of mental illness. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but if you subscribe, you will never run out of toilet paper in a public bathroom ever again, guaranteed, or your money back. I just want to say, can you try and get onto my Insta? I'll be honest with you, I've neglected my Insta for many, many years. I've had some other dude posting for me. I'm like a father that's been kicked out of the family home, who's neglected his children, but I'm back and I will pay you more attention. Instagram account, so go on there to find out more about the background information to my day-to-day life. Anyways, back to the video. How will Mason Greenwood be treated in prison? So I did a recent video on how Alex Belfield might be treated in prison, and I said that it's reasonable that a lot of prisoners might necessarily not know who he is, because even though that was a high profile case, it was only sort of high profile in certain areas. And also his offence, Belfield's, of kind of stalking celebrities, being quite anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment, might even get him kudos in the prison system. However, Mason Greenwood is completely different from that. He's extremely high profile, he's been in the news, he's a famous footballer, and there's a hierarchy amongst prisoners. So people that offend against women and children are seen as like scum, the lowest of the low. In some American prisons, they are KOS, as my boy Sean Atwood would say, kill on sight. In the UK prison system, I don't think it's quite that intense, but he certainly will be a target. He certainly will be, there'll be people looking out to rough him up a little bit just for their own sort of street cred, their own kudos. So what I'm saying is, I think it's very likely that Mason Greenwood will be a target. Having said that, the prison absolutely will be prepared. The staff will know the situation. I think it's very likely that he will be put in protective custody, known in some prisons as the VP wing, the vulnerable prison wing. So he'll be protected away, usually with sex offenders, away from main population. Even if he is in the main population, he will be sort of protected and he will be separated. So for example, when there's association, when there's time on the yard, etc., that will be in different times of the day so that he's not exposed to people that could hurt him. You could argue there's a chance he'd be sent to SEG, so that means segregation unit. Some people are sent there for their own protection, but it's usually because they're so uncontrollable, they're so agitated, they're so violent that they can't be contained on the ordinary wings, so they need a high level of containment. They have their own sort of special low intensity area where they're kept in their cell for much longer, loads more prison staff in that particular area per prisoner to observe them. As I said, it's not usually for people for their own protection, but it definitely happens. I've definitely seen it happen. So that's what I think his kind of level of protection will be. But having said that, despite that, I think that there will be a lot of people who are out there to make a name for themselves. So I think they'll go out of their way to potentially attack him. Just as a sort of obtuse kind of comment, which came to me when I was writing this, I've seen on other videos related to other prisoners, people making comments like, if somebody's on remand and they haven't been yet proven guilty, why would prisoners go for them if they're, innocent until proven guilty? Prisoners do not GAF about that. If there's even a suspicion that somebody, especially somebody that's as famous, as high profile as Mason Greenwood, has committed this kind of offence, you know, then they're not going to wait. The prisoner's not going to wait till the trial. They don't care about their kind of delicacies and the subtleties of the law. He'll still be a target in prison. He's very much guilty until proven innocent. The other thing that I think should be mentioned is it kind of depends on Greenwood's attitude. So obviously he is somebody that strikes me as a very entitled man. He's probably very narcissistic, probably very arrogant. If these accusations are true, I should say, because, you know, he's obviously denied them. Assuming that everything is true, all the offences, then to me it's not just the original offences that he committed, but the very fact that he went on to breach his bail conditions. I think it's fair to say that the offences that he committed are far more horrific, far more impactful, but to me as a psychiatrist, his latter behaviours are far more revealing about his personality, because even with all the attention that's come on him, all the press, all these restrictions being placed on bail, he still, despite that, still feels entitled. He still feels this core belief inside him, which is, I'm so important, I do not need to obey the law, the rules don't apply to me. So, despite everything I've just said, there is one thing that can potentially protect Mason Greenwood, and that is his money. So there are lots of people in prisons. It happens really commonly in the States, less so in the UK, but it does happen, especially in the kind of higher category, like Category A prisons, which is where Mason Greenwood almost certainly will end up due to the nature of his allegations. They might offer extortion money. So they're basically going to say, somebody as rich as you put in some money. Obviously, he doesn't directly give it to them in prison, but he makes the phone call and it gets put into an account and they will protect him. A couple of things I'd say about that is that with somebody with so much money who's so rich, I think there's a big risk that this might escalate. So they might want more and more money. They might kind of protect him to a degree and then suggest that he needs more protection money, otherwise bad things might happen to him. The other thing I'd say is that even though some prisoners might protect him, other prisoners won't care. So they're not all in cahoots, they're not all part of this deal. They certainly won't want to spread the money around. So even though there's some protecting him, there'll be a lot of others, I think, that will be out to give him a bit of street justice. So his money might protect him to a degree, but it might not completely keep him safe. So that's it, my Psych for Sore guys and gals. That's my summary of the situation with Mason Greenwood, how I think he's likely to be treated in prison. Okay, I said as a bonus, I was asked you a question and I wanted the answer. And the question was, what's the longest time an individual prisoner has been on the run? Drum roll, please. It is a whopping 60 years. And his nationality, this man was an Irishman. Not to be mistaken for the film The Irishman, which also felt like it had a runtime for 60 years. So the dude's name was John Patrick Hannon, and he was jailed in 1955 after being convicted of a car robbery and the assault of 2 policemen in the UK. However, just 30 days into his 21-month sentence, he broke out of the Verne prison in England. And it was basically Hannon and his fellow prisoner 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 Thomas, and they fled the jail under the cover of darkness. They literally, and I'm not making this up, they used knotted sheets to scale down the prison wall. Both men were aged 22 at the time. Thomas, the other guy, was recaptured within 24 hours, but Hannon remained on the run and remains on the run to this day. So to me, it's obvious who the brains of the operation was. Dorset police ended their active search for Hannon in 1966. If he's still alive, then he would be aged 81 by now. And here's an interesting thing, I think. The Guinness Book of Records currently refuses to recognise Hannon's achievement unless he hands himself into authority. What a dilemma. What are you going to do? Freedom for the rest of your life or notoriety and fame? What do you want to do? Do you want to go out in a blaze of glory? I think I would choose the latter. So if you got that question within 10% of 60 years, then get yourself a cookie and you can bill me. If you got both the length of time right and the nationality, buy yourself a Tesla and you can bill Dr. Grande. That's all I have to say. I've rabbited on enough. Go buy my goddamn book. Go check out my Insta account. All the details in the links, etc., etc. Have a blessed day. Stay euthymic. And do not forget, I love you.